Greetings, virtual wanderers, Aeons here. Pokemon. Who doesn't know Pokemon? It's the legendary franchise we all know as a monster catching RPG that is still going strong even after 30 years. We know the early generations of Pokemon are linear games, but lately they've been experimenting on the newest generation by going open world. But is it considered a good open world? And with the new upcoming Pokemon Winds and Waves announced as going to be fully open world, it's the perfect time to see just how good or bad an open world the Pokemon series was and might be in the future. They've already made a fully open world not too long ago, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but it's a little rough around the edges on the first switch. You get a really bad frame rate and a lot of bugs. The actual game itself wasn't a bad attempt though. But just being open world doesn't automatically make it good, because the real question isn't whether Pokemon can go open world, it's whether the series can keep up with all the space in the first place. And to answer that, we need to look at the full picture. How Pokemon was designed from the very beginning, how slowly and carefully Game Freak has been shifting towards something bigger, and most importantly, why that shift has taken so damn long. Because this isn't just a story about open worlds, it's a story about a franchise that releases fast but evolves slowly, and what happens when the ambition starts to outpace the time they give themselves to build it. Now before we get into it, we actually just did a tier list on all the Pokemon games on Nintendo Switch. So if you want to know where all the Pokemon games on the Switch stand against each other, feel free to check it out. Okay, let's go back to where it all started. From the very first games on the Game Boy all the way to the Nintendo 3DS era, every mainline Pokemon game was built on the same foundation. Small contained areas, connected by linear routes. There was always only one path forward. You go through a town, beat the gym, and you repeat that over and over again. It was simple and straightforward. Well, because it's linear, and Game Freak knew that it worked, so they kept it. Generation after generation, the structure barely changed. What did change was the dressing around it. Each new game brought a fresh roster of Pokemon, and over the years, they layered in a couple of new features on top of the formula. Breeding and egg mechanics, minigames like the Safari Zone, the Game Corner, and Pokemon contests that gave the world just a little bit more texture. At one point, they even added special evolution conditions that made certain Pokemon feel like secrets worth hunting for, like playing the game upside down. These were fun additions, but here's the thing, none of them challenged the world design itself. The routes were still linear, the towns were still contained, and the formula was still the same old formula. Game Freak is definitely guilty of that. And you can't really blame them for it. The core loop of Pokemon, catching, training, and battling, was strong enough to carry the whole series, even if the world itself had the bare minimum. Either way, when something works that well, you don't have to put a lot of pressure to blow it up. But that design does come with a trade-off. The moment they remove linear structure, you're left with a question Pokemon never had to answer. What makes the world worth exploring? And for a long time, that question didn't matter. So if Pokemon games have design limitations, why didn't they fix it sooner? Well, for a long time, they didn't have to. Pokemon isn't just a video game series. It's one of the highest grossing franchises in history, and they have a tight and controlled schedule for all releases. Anime seasons need a new region to adapt, trading card sets need new Pokemon to print, merchandise needs to hit shelves. Everything moves together, and the games have to keep up with all of it. The result is a release timeline that would make most developers sweat, which gives them a lot of pressure. And with that going on, they're not going to redesign the entire world of Pokemon all of a sudden, so they end up making safe additions. That means small changes and features that fit into the structure that they already understand. And to be fair, it works. because their fanbase is still growing. But that's the trap, because the more successful that formula becomes, the harder it is to change it. And eventually that same structure started carrying more weight than it was ever designed for. That's just the reality of what Pokémon is as a franchise. And it actually matters. Let's compare Game Freak to one of the biggest names in open world gaming. Breath of the Wild took 4 years to make. Game Freak, in roughly that same time frame, has shipped well over 6 mainline Pokémon titles. And with those titles, almost every criticism you'll hear about are of Pokémon's open world attempts. Their bugs, shallow side content, NPCs that don't feel alive at all, and all of it traces back to where it all started. And that is that they never put in actual development time to get all of it right. So with all of that context, let's actually look at how Game Freak started making their move to the full open world territory. It didn't happen overnight, it happened slowly, and looking back, you can actually trace the exact moments where the design philosophy started shifting. The first real signal came with Pokémon Sword and Shield on the Nintendo Switch, specifically the Wild Area. It was a seamless open zone sitting right in the middle of an otherwise traditional Pokémon game. It had free camera movement, dynamic weather, and most importantly, Pokémon you could actually see roaming around in the world instead of jumping out at you from tall grass. It wasn't a full open world by any stretch, because structurally nothing really changed. The rest of the game was still very much linear. Routes and progression were still fixed. But the attempt was there, and the Dynamax mechanic fit right into this. They're basically giant Pokémon filling up stadiums and wild spaces. It was built around the idea of big open environments, and with that, the pieces were starting to come together. Then came Legends Arceus, and this one was the first bold attempt. Almost the entire game takes place in open wilderness areas, and inside it, Pokémon roam more freely, with some being passive and some being aggressive, behaving like actual creatures in an ecosystem. After all, it's much better than the traditional random encounters, right? Now the catching and battling mechanics were completely reimagined to fit the space as well. Pokémon Legends Arceus was more of a freestyle Pokémon game, but it still wasn't a full open world. There were still loading screens between the areas. However, the design philosophy clearly had a big shift here, and the introduction of Alpha Pokémon, which are rare and powerful variants just living out in the world, gave players a real reason to explore every corner. The game felt like Game Freak letting themselves experiment without the pressure of it being a mainline entry. And a lot of what they figured out here clearly fed directly into what came next. And that is Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. This release was Game Freak's first genuine swing at a fully seamless open world, and it was a decent swing nonetheless, because Game Freak finally started investing in some real open world features. The game has 3 completely different story paths, essentially a non-linear story. They added in legendary Pokémon that became mounts almost from the very beginning. It even has a crafting material system that actually gave you a reason to hunt specific Pokémon beyond just filling out your Pokédex. Sound familiar? Because if that doesn't sound like something you'd get in an open world game, I don't know what is. But for some reason, they didn't use dynamic boss levels. You can challenge the last gym, but putting your level 1 Pokémon against the level 47 Pokémon is simply impossible without a good grind. And then there was the performance. Scarlet and Violet launched on the Nintendo Switch 1 hardware that was simply not built for what the game was trying to do. The game was full of frame drops, game crashes, and bugs that ranged from funny to genuinely frustrating. It became a talking point that overshadowed a lot of what the game actually got right. The vision was there, but the hardware ceiling just wasn't high enough to meet it. And then we have Legend ZA, which is interesting because it's taking the open world concept in a completely different direction than the previous Pokémon Legends game. Rather than the wide open wilderness, it went urban and dense, with Lumio City as a fully seamless living environment. It's smaller in scale, but potentially much richer in detail. However, even though it did do better in some areas compared to Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, the game was actually a step back from it. But it did show that Game Freak was actually able to create a living city though. Anyway, the big picture across all of these games is consistent. It doesn't feel like a big change. It feels like they take very cautious steps. And the execution has just been catching up slowly, one game at a time. And here's where we have to be honest. Scarlet and Violet proved that a fully open world Pokemon game can exist, but it also put a spotlight on everything the series still hasn't figured out yet. And these aren't small gaps. In the context of what open world games are capable of today, some of them are pretty significant. The most visible issue with Scarlet and Violet was how it ran. And while it's easy to point the finger at Game Freak, a lot of that falls on the hardware. The Nintendo Switch 1 was already aging by the time Scarlet and Violet launched, and building a seamless open world on it was always going to be a stretch. The move to Nintendo Switch 2 for Winds and Waves is a genuinely important development for this reason. Now I know better hardware doesn't fix everything, but it removes one of the biggest ceilings that was holding the last game back. Moving on, this is probably the most fundamental gap. In a strong open world design, the world environment needs to pull you in. One that does so naturally, like a mysterious landmark or a place that gives more side stories. In Pokémon, exploring usually leads you to the same things, especially if you've played enough Pokémon games to notice. It's usually just more items, more battles, and more Pokémon, which sounds fine, until you realize the game is just one big line of the same story no matter how many times you play it. Now Scarlet and Violet had a lot going on top of their seamless open world. They had Titan Pokémon, Team Star bases, Terror Raid battles, sandwich making. On a list, that's actually plenty to do, but dig into any of it and the depth isn't really there. Most of it is a surface level activity that you complete once and move on from it forever. The game got away with it because there was enough quantity to keep you busy, or maybe that was just the 10th new Pokemon lineup. But in a truly great open world, side content is something that actually matters in the game. It gives you a reason to care about the world outside of the main story, and sadly, Pokemon just isn't there yet. And here's the thing, none of these are random failures. They all connect back to the same problem we talked about earlier, the development cycle. When you're building a new game almost every year, you don't have the time to build deep systems from the ground up. That means you don't have time to build reactive NPC systems, write side quests with real narrative weight, or polish every corner of a massive seamless world. You just ship what you can, and then you build on it, well, next time. That's exactly what Game Freak has been doing, and it's actually gotten them this far. But the open world format exposes every gap in a way that a linear game never did, because suddenly all that empty space needs to be filled with something worth your time. So Pokemon ultimately proved to us that they can at least get the seamless map part right. But what actually needs to happen for Pokemon to become a genuinely great open world? Well, actually, a couple of things. The biggest thing missing right now is side content that actually matters. Not just optional activities to pad out the map, but branching side quests where your choices have real consequences. That means stories happening out in the world that give you a reason to talk to every NPC you come across. And rewards that make you feel like exploring was worth it beyond just another item in your bag. What if Pokemon had side content like Zelda Breath of the Wild? Because every corner of that game had something going on, whether it was the shrines with different puzzles or Koroks hidden in corners. But the best part is that the side quests told stories about the people living there. Now imagine Pokemon with that same level of care put into its side content. Trainer stories out in the wild, towns with their own problems for you to solve, or maybe mysteries tied to the region's history that you can only find if you actually go looking. The catching and battling loop is already strong enough to carry the game, but side content like that would make the world itself worth exploring. Now, Pokemon worlds have always been charming, but in an open world, charm only goes so far. Right now, the world exists only to give you the smallest encounters. And that's not enough. The world itself needs to be a part of the gameplay, and most importantly, NPC dialogues need to shift based on where you are in the story. Towns should look or at least feel different after major events. The world should respond to you in ways you can actually notice, not just from the main story, but even from the side content as well. There's a lot of things that can improve the world experience, like the noble Pokemon and Arceus. Let's say when the noble Pokemon is frenzied in the story, they can make the overworld Pokemon spawn more through mass outbreaks or drop the spawn rates so that there's a reason for you to calm the noble Pokemon. Examples like that will help guide the player naturally and give them a reason to play more. Now, I gotta say, Scarlet and Violet moved the needle on non-linear progression, or did they? Sure, you can challenge any of the gym leaders in any order, but the thing is, their levels don't change at all. They were actually so close yet so far from making the game's story non-linear, because that is the whole reason you'll be challenging the gym leaders in the intended order, regardless of whether or not you're free to choose which one to challenge first. So Scarlet and Violet, for the most part, still very much had linear progression. And that's a big no-no as an open world. Open worlds are all about being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. They give the player freedom in what they choose to do first. So what they could have done is make the gym leader's Pokemon levels scale to whatever level your Pokemon is, or at least slightly higher than it. It gives the experience so many more possibilities, and actually makes it non-linear. That is just one way to make the game respond to the player, instead of forcing them to watch a walkthrough just to find out the best way to play the game. Those are just some of the things they could do to improve the game, and all of it comes back to time. Game Freak is a relatively small studio building games for a franchise that moves at an enormous commercial pace. To close the gap between where Pokemon's open worlds are now and where they need to be, something has to give. Either the release timeline slows down, the team scales up significantly, or both. There's no shortcut around it, and the ideas are clearly there. Legends Arceus showed real creativity, and Scarlet and Violet showed real ambition. What's been missing is the runway to fully execute on either of them. So Winds and Waves will be the clearest test yet of whether Game Freak is finally giving themselves enough space to get it right. All in all though, Pokemon has come a very long way from the linear routes of Red and Green. The Wild area, Legends Arceus, Scarlet and Violet, each one is a step closer to something genuinely great, even if none of them fully got there. Winds and Waves has every reason to be the best shot yet, because they're gonna have better hardware, more experience, and a studio that has clearly been building towards this for years. But if this series has taught us anything, it's that ambition alone doesn't fill an open world. So be hopeful, but just keep your expectations honest. Because the real question was never whether Pokemon could go open world, it's whether they can finally make all that space worth getting lost in. So what do you guys think of the video? If you liked it, don't forget to hit like, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so we know that you want more videos like this in the future. In the meantime, I'll be catching all the Pokemon on Scarlet and Violet. Okay, that's it for now. And until then, happy exploring.